we are back with Overanalyzing House of the Dragon with part 25 of how Rhaenyra's Blacks faced off against Aegon's Greens in the Dance of the Dragons. Forces have been trying to keep Rhaenyra, Rhaenys, and Daemon out of power, but now the rejected parties have all allied through blood and marriage. Rhaenyra and Daemon have now wed and are parents to Rhaenys' grandchildren, who are also all betrothed. The alliance of the Blacks is strong. Meanwhile, with the Greens, Aegon II and his sister Helena have also wed. And so let's continue. And so she did. And quickly. Barely a year later, in 123 AC, the 14-year-old princess gave birth to twins. A boy she named Jaehaera, and a girl called Jaehaera. Prince Aegon had heirs of his own now, the Greens at court proclaimed happily. A dragon's egg was placed in the cradle of each child, and 2 hatchlings soon came forth. Yet all was not well with these new twins. Jaehaera was tiny and slow to grow. She did not cry, she did not smile. She did none of the things a babe was meant to do. Her brother, whilst larger and more robust, was also less perfect than was expected of a Targaryen princeling, boasting 6 fingers on his left hand and 6 toes upon each foot. And so next we hear about Aegon and Helena's twins, Jaehaera and Jaehaera, heirs that supposedly balance out Jace with Rhaenyra, according to the Greens. So, on occasion in our story, the existence of a male heir is put forward by Gyldayn as strength to a person's claim to the throne. For example, we hear of Rhaenys mentioning her potential male heir when she's passed over, and Gyldayn mentioning that Balon had 2 healthy sons as things going for him. Heirs are a good thing, it seems, and this is related to the idea that an heir represents secure succession in the future and stability for the realm. Of course, when children or a lack of children does not suit the argument, Gyldayn promptly ignores it. For example, Viserys is chosen over Rhaenys at the Great Council, and it's never mentioned that, at the time, Viserys had no male heir and was having difficulty producing one. Not to mention, it seems logically off to uproot clear succession with the argument that the new line is somehow more secure. Rhaenyra has been heir for over 18 years at this point in the story, and has 5 sons. Pointing out that Aegon II has a baby son is hardly much of an argument for political stability. So we then hear that the children got eggs which quickly hatched. Which is striking. We aren't sure what hatches dragon eggs, but Rhaenyra and Rhaenys seem to be 2 individuals who are perhaps very good at it. Somehow. Rhaenys' son Laenor hatched an egg, as did Rhaenyra and 4 of her sons. One could even argue that Aegon II and Daeron's eggs could have been hatched by Rhaenyra being close by. Rhaenys and Rhaenyra's ability to hatch dragon eggs may explain why people did not want them on the throne. But here, we get dragon eggs hatching in King's Landing away from Rhaenyra and Rhaenys. And this is somewhat difficult to explain. It seems that the incest between Aegon and Helena brought together special genes, making one of their children special enough to hatch an egg. And so let's talk about Jaehaera. The big thing with her is that she did not cry, and she did not smile, and she did not do any of the things a baby was meant to do. And this is very weird. Babies cry. Healthy babies cry. Unhealthy babies cry. Children are not aemotional, at least not in the real world. However, for George R. R. Martin, this sort of thing can happen. Jaehaera is strikingly similar to the character of Adara from The Ice Dragon. Adara smiled, but not often. No one had ever seen her cry. In both stories, we have a silver-haired, aemotional girl with a dragon, and Adara is supernaturally special. Now, I will say that George R. R. Martin is not very consistent with the character of Jaehaera. Later in Fire and Blood, with portions written well after the Rogue Prince and Princess and the Queen, Jaehaera is described not as aemotional, but hyper-emotional, crying all the time, wetting the bed, and needing sweet sleep to get through social gatherings. Her character switches from being like Adara to being like Sweet Robin. But Sweet Robin too can be seen as a special character, oddly hearing singing that no one else is hearing, and knowing information he shouldn't know about. And so while Jaehaera is not written consistently with regards to her emotion, she is consistently paralleled to other supernatural characters. And then we have Jaehaerys, Now, we get very little on this character. He exists in the story solely to be murdered later on. But it's notable that Jaehaera has 6 fingers. Now, weird genetic abnormalities can sometimes be attributed to inbreeding, that is, recessive genes coming together. The Targaryens are super inbred, so Jaehaera coming out a little weird is not unexpected. Except the condition of polydactylism is not a recessive trait. It's either a mutation or a dominant trait, meaning it would have nothing to do with Targaryen incest. And George R. R. Martin, being a sci-fi writer who heavily focused on genetic engineering, likely knew this. Now, we have absolutely no mention of extra digits in any Targaryen in our story. Perhaps it runs in the Hightower family, but we have no evidence of that either. Perhaps Helaena was molested by a 6-finger individual, but again, no evidence. In the end, the fingers and toes are probably just a random mutation. They seem to have absolutely no function in the story whatsoever, other than to be a weird and creepy thing in this paragraph specifically. There is no insight on the greater story that we can derive from this. The only thing that I can think of is that later on, Jaehaera is suspected of being killed by a guard group called the Fingers, but the guard isn't even an extra finger or anything like that. There's 10 of them. So it's a pretty big stretch to connect the idea of Jaehaerys' hand with Jaehaera's death. A wife and children did little to curb the carnal appetites of Prince Aegon the Elder. If Mushroom is to be believed, he fathered 2 bastard children the same year as the twins. A boy on a girl whose maidenhead he won at auction on the Strait of Silk, and a girl by one of his mother's maidservants. And in 127 AC, Princess Helaena gave birth to his second son, who was given a dragon's egg and the name Maelor. And so next we hear a little on the character of Aegon II. According to Mushroom, he fathers a bastard boy on a sex worker from the Strait of Silk and a bastard girl with a maidservant in the year 123. And then he fathers another child on Helaena in 127. Now it's of course showing that Aegon's supposed bastards are mentioned by Gildain, while Laenor's are not. Laenor, according to Septon Eustace and Grand Maester Munkin, fathered 2 bastards the year he had Jace. It's the same situation, fathering bastards the same year as one's first trueborn son. But the information is omitted as it doesn't fit Gildain's narrative that Laenor was gay. So, in case you're wondering, this bastard boy of Aegon in this paragraph is not Gaemon Palehair. Gaemon Palehair is a supposed Aegon bastard would-be king invented by George R. R. Martin that shows up later in Fire and Blood, but was not in the original Princess and the Queen or Rogue Prince. Both Gaemon and this bastard boy are sired on the Strait of Silk within 3 years of each other, but this bastard was born in 123 and Gaemon in 126. Realistically, there is no reason Gildain would not be mentioning the 3rd bastard of Gaemon here. It supports the idea that Aegon had carnal appetites, Mushroom would certainly mention it as he later writes on Gaemon, and Gaemon's birth happens in the right period for the paragraph, as this paragraph mentions events from 127 and Gaemon was born in 126. Gaemon should absolutely be mentioned here, but when George R. R. Martin edited Fire and Blood, he apparently missed reviewing this paragraph. Now at the end of the paragraph, we hear about Maelor, who was born in the year 127 and given an egg. And keep in mind, Maelor's egg never hatches in the boy's 3 years on Earth, but no one ever speaks of this being an ill omen. If you recall, last time Gildain claimed that Viserys II's egg, not hatching in the year 122, ruined the joyous nature of the year. Maelor's egg also doesn't hatch, but 3 years later, everything is fine. In fact, when the Dance of the Dragons happens, Maelor's egg is still catalogued among the Green's dragons, as if there was still potential for it hatching, after 3 years. For some reason, Gildain only gives a short window of hatching for Viserys' egg, 1 year, but over 3 years for Maelor. Queen Alicent's other sons had been growing older as well. Prince Aemond, despite the loss of his eye, had become a proficient and dangerous swordsman under the tutelage of Sir Criston Cole, but remained a wild and willful child, hot-tempered and unforgiving. His little brother, Prince Daeron, was the most popular of the Queen's sons, as clever as he was courteous, and most comely as well. When he turned 12 in 126 AC, Daeron was sent to Oldtown to serve as cupbearer and squire to Lord Hightower. And so here we find that Aemond has become a proficient swordsman under the direction of Criston Cole. Interestingly, although Criston Cole's favorite weapon was the Morning Star, or actually flail, after the death of Joffrey Lonmouth in 114, we never hear about him using the weapon ever again. Cole trains Aemond in the sword, and in battle during the dance, Cole uses a longsword. Although this may be nothing, as knights are trained in many weapons and use many weapons, it may also be that Criston Cole actually felt guilty about killing Joffrey Lonmouth. Again, the flail is a notoriously inaccurate weapon, and if Criston Cole did accidentally kill Lonmouth, it would stand to reason that Cole would move away from using that weapon because of his own personal guilt. Of course, it could also be that he moved away from using the flail because king and court frowned upon it. Now, as for Aemond, it is interesting that we hear about Aemond being a proficient and dangerous swordsman despite the loss of an eye. Obviously, the lack of an eye would hinder his perception of depth and generally decrease the field of his vision. And so becoming a great swordsman despite this is quite impressive. That said, we never hear about Aemond One-Eye in a single sword fight. Oh, he threatens Luke, a 14-year-old boy, and that's it. Despite Gildane's claim, we actually have no evidence that Aemond was good with the sword at all. In fact, I would seriously doubt he ever was. Keep in mind, Daemon, riding a much weaker dragon, was able to kill Aemond by exploiting his blind side in battle. It's a pretty obvious weakness that Aemond has, and one would think that a sword fighter would exploit the exact same weakness during a duel. It's just not believable that Aemond excelled at sword fighting, and we have no evidence that he did. Anyway, we then hear a little bit about Daeron, the often forgotten fourth child of Alicent. Clever, courteous, and sent to Oldtown in 126 to be a cupbearer. Now, why Daeron is sent to Oldtown is never explained. It may well be only a plot contrivance to have Daeron with the Hightower army during the Dance of the Dragons. It's not exactly an easy thing to take on a young man with a living dragon. Would the Hightowers even have the resources to take care of such a thing? But it's all done, almost as a throwaway line. It's certainly not clear what the Crown is getting out of giving the Hightowers Daeron. We do know that at some point Otto's brother dies, and Otto's nephew takes over as Lord, so it may be that Otto felt he needed to secure loyalty from his nephew. But if this were the case, I don't know why Viserys would agree to it. Perhaps it was done to appease Oldtown forces so Aegon and Helaena could marry, but again, that marriage isn't too important to Viserys. We aren't really presented with any good reason why Viserys would give up his son. Now, related to all of this, there is a theory that perhaps Daeron was born without silver gold hair and sent away because they didn't want to have a brunette around when Vaemond Velaryon's cousins petitioned to get Driftmark that same year. And while this is a possibility, the turning of 12 seems to be an important event, as if there was an agreement in place to send Daeron to Oldtown when he turned 12. While the petition from the Velaryon cousins happened because Corlys got sick. We can't really have a planned event in response to an accidental event. Then again, maybe Corlys' sickness wasn't so accidental, but we'll get to that soon. Another idea is that Daeron was sent away because he was not thoroughly anti-black. Daeron was said to be a courteous character, which goes against the idea that he was a rival to anyone, let alone the Velaryon boys. Daeron was of an age with Jace, and the two were milk brothers. It's quite possible that the two were actually friends, and the Greens didn't like this, and he was sent away to get some Hightower seasoning. But again, none of these explanations explain why Viserys would agree to have his son sent away. That same year, across Blackwater Bay, the sea snake was stricken by a sudden fever. As he took to his bed, surrounded by maesters, the issue arose as to who should succeed him as the Lord of the Tides and Master of Driftmark, should the sickness claim him. With both his true-born children dead, by law his lands and titles should pass to his eldest grandson, Jaehaera. But since Jace would presumably ascend the Iron Throne after his mother, Princess Rhaenyra urged her good father to name instead her second son, Lucerys. Lord Corlys also had half a dozen nephews, however, and the eldest of them, Sir Vaemond Velaryon, protested that the inheritance by rights should pass to him, on the grounds that Rhaenyra's sons were bastards, sired by Harwin Strong. The princess was not slow in answering this charge. She dispatched Prince Daemon to seize Sir Vaemond and had his head removed, and fed his carcass to her dragon Syrax. And so next we get the very odd tale of Vaemond Velaryon and his attempt to get Driftmark. This story doesn't make too much sense, and we essentially have to accept that either the Velaryon family is filled with a lot of idiots, or the Maesters somehow pulled off one hell of a conspiracy. So, Corlys Velaryon gets a fever and is surrounded by Maesters, and this prompts Rhaenyra to want to sort out the issue of succession for Driftmark. Why this wasn't done 6 years prior when Laenor and Laena died is unknown. In fact, it's not really certain why Rhaenyra would need a succession change at all. Jace is the accepted heir of Driftmark. He can become lord until such time as he takes the Iron Throne, and then can give it to his brother. After all, Robert gave up his lordship of Storm's End and gave it to Renly when he became king. This entire ordeal isn't needed. But who knows, maybe the Maesters made it seem like it was needed. Nonetheless, Vaemond then comes along and claims that he should get Driftmark, claiming Rhaenyra's kids are bastards, which is just an outrageously boneheaded move. First off, obviously, you don't insult Rhaenyra, the heir to the Iron Throne, someone with power and a dragon. Also, it seems odd to make this claim when Corlys is still alive, and seems to have the cognitive ability to discuss the issue with Maesters. But even if one ignores this, Vaemond is wrong. He's not next in line in succession. Baela Targaryen is, and she is betrothed to Jace, and after Baela is followed by Rhaena, who's betrothed to Luke. So it all doesn't really matter. Whether succession passes through the boys or it passes through the girls, it ends up in the same place, with the same couples. And under no circumstance would Driftmark go to Vaemond. It's hard to understand what Vaemond could possibly be hoping would happen. That Corlys would change his mind and switch his heir to Baela, and then that somehow would trigger the world into accepting Jace's bastardy, and that would somehow trigger Viserys disinheriting Rhaenyra for Aegon, and that would result in the Greens rewarding Vaemond later by removing Baela and installing him? Because that's absolutely crazy. Or are Baela and Rhaena just not in the line of succession for some reason? And why would that be? From what we can tell, Valyrian houses had more equality between the sexes than Westerosi houses, not less. The whole thing is just such a weird, convoluted tale. Again, maybe the Maesters are whispering in everybody's ears, or maybe the Velaryons are a bunch of idiots, but most likely, it's just that we're near the end of The Rogue Prince, and our author's degree of effort dropped off a bit. Whatever the case, Rhaenyra catches wind of things, dispatches Daemon, who kills Vaemond, and then returns to Dragonstone with the body to have it fed to Syrax. And this all seems rather logistically unlikely. I'm unsure why Daemon would behead Vaemond and then return with the whole dead body just for Syrax to eat it. That's really quite a pain, and returning with the head would have been sufficient. Cersei, for example, is not asking for Tyrion's body in A Feast for Crows. Even this did not end the matter, however. Sir Vaemond's younger cousins fled to King's Landing with his wife and sons, there to cry for justice and place their claims before the king and queen. King Viserys had grown extremely fat and red of face, and scarce had the strength to mount the steps to the Iron Throne. His Grace heard them out in a stony silence, then ordered their tongues removed, every one. "You were warned," he declared, as they were dragged away. "I will hear no more of these lies." And so after the absolutely boneheaded move of Vaemond questioning the paternity of Jace, Luke, and Joffrey in an attempt to get Driftmark, Vaemond's wife, children, and cousins then flee to King's Landing to make the same error. And again, I have no idea what's going on in these people's heads. They are absolute idiots. They flee Driftmark, even though we hear nothing about their lives being in danger, then go to Viserys, the brother of Daemon and the father of Rhaenyra, in a call for justice and to claim Driftmark, even though Viserys had specifically warned everyone never to bring up the bastard rumor again. It's really difficult to determine what they thought would happen. That somehow Viserys would call his own grandchildren bastards and then disinherit Baela and Rhaena and then hand Driftmark to a random cousin, even though Corlys isn't even dead? Even ignoring the fact that Corlys isn't dead, and ignoring Jace, Luke, Joffrey, Baela, and Rhaena, Vaemond's children would be next in line, and so I don't know why these random cousins are making such an incredibly risky move. Did they think that the king would not be ruling and it would just be the queen and the hand? I mean, it is odd that they're putting their claims before the queen, but they are putting their claims before the king as well. Viserys scarce has the strength to mount the steps of the Iron Throne, but he still has the strength to do it. It's only after this event that we hear about Viserys leaving the governance to the Hand and the Small Council. But even accepting that these characters are absolute idiots or something else is going on off screen, the scene also doesn't make any sense as it contradicts Fire and Blood later on. Here in this scene, Viserys supposedly takes out the tongues of everyone. The wife, the sons, the cousins. He ordered their tongues removed, every one. Yet later on in Fire and Blood, Vaemond's sons return to the story to claim Driftmark again. And at that point, only the cousins, called the Silent Five, had no tongues. So somehow Viserys didn't remove every one of their tongues, and somehow the two sons, who have the best claim of the lot, were silent while the 5 cousins with weaker claims were loud. And no, this disparity was not because Vaemond's children were young and deserved mercy or anything like that. They were all grown men. For some reason, George R. R. Martin retconned Vaemond's sons' tongues back in their mouths and then didn't change this paragraph. Or didn't change it enough, rather. In the original Rogue Prince, the cousins are actually Vaemond's younger brothers, and they are changed to cousins in Fire and Blood, which makes the whole situation even more perplexing, as there was a review of this paragraph, but the tongues thing wasn't addressed. And this is a good place to stop. We'll continue on with Viserys' failing health and George R. R. Martin's messy Maester situation in part 26. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.